Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing.
Pinder, it's great to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Thanks for having me along.
It's great. So tell me a little bit for people who don't. Oh my goodness, I'm going to start again. That was terrible. I've never done that bit before. Right, okay, we'll start again. Hi Pinder, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Yeah, very good, thank you. You're on for a Monday, and thanks for having me along.
It's great to have you here. Tell us, for those who don't know you, do you want to tell people a little bit about you?
Yeah, well, I'm Pinder. I'm the managing director of Falcon Insurance. We are a commercial broker. We're based over in the Jewellery Quarter in Birmingham. Whilst we're a whole of market, commercial broker, so we look after the engineering, manufacturing, construction, and like. We have a certain forte with property. I'm an investor in Landlord myself, so I understand the needs and wants of most landlords and what they're looking for. So we have a certain niche in and around sort of especially difficult to place property.
And that kind of leads us into supported living, doesn't it, really? Because actually supported living is quite a challenge for insurance, isn't it? Do you want to explain why that is?
Yeah, I mean, see, supported living, it's where under your normal tenancies, the landlord has a say of who's going to be in the property. You've done a background check on them, credit check, and so on and so forth. You're letting it out to an organisation, and unknown tenants are going to be going in there. Right, so whilst you may well be able to specify, so I don't want certain types of tenant groups, you still have no idea of who's going in that property, yeah? And that's subletting. And 95% of insurers will not allow subletting on their standard landlord policies, which, yeah, so it's a challenge. Whilst you think it's a straightforward DSS let, it is and it isn't because of how it's let, right? Because it's going via the supported living agency and they're putting their tenants in, so there's your sublet, right? So insurers only need any reason to not to pay you, and that'll be one straight away.
If you haven't declared that it's supported living, you mean if you've just got a standard living, yeah. So if you had a standard landlord policy and you hadn't declared that you were letting it to a supported living provider, then you wouldn't be covered when there was a claim. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So it is really important that people check their policies and make sure that they understand what is and isn't covered under their policies, then, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people make an assumption, right, and those assumptions are completely wrong, right? I've been in the insurance industry for 35 years, right? So we've seen the industry change, massively. Whereas insurers used to be a little bit more lenient, they're now ever so strict about not wanting to pay a claim where they can't, if you give them a reason, they'll happily take that reason and not pay you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the onus is very much upon yourself as the policy holder, right, to make sure that you get it right. So you can't buy these type of policies online. You have to speak to a specialist broker, be it us or be it any other provider in the market. So as long as they understand property, you need to make sure you get the cover right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And are there any particular groups, like tenant groups within supported living, which are harder to place for insurance? Is there anything that's more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, halfway houses for prisoners, ex-offenders, very difficult place because you don't know who's going to be coming in. Could be an ex-arsonist, sex offenders, etc. So moral grounds are a lot of insurers want to try and keep away from that sort of thing. Under 18s, very few insurers will want to do them as well. Under 18s pose their own problems. It opens up the insurers to a hell of a lot more claims, right? Even under the landlord's policy, so if something goes wrong, then you've got a child that's been hurt. Insurers don't like the risks that sort of come along with children. So your ex-offenders, you've got they don't particularly like ex-addicts, but they're easier to place than the other two, ex-offenders and children.
It's unfair, isn't it? It seems like, same with mortgages, they kind of make sweeping decisions, don't they, in this space, the brokers and kind of, or the underwriters probably, about things.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of them just don't understand it, but the ones that do it, the problem we're having or seeing now, John, is unscrupulous providers, people that think, oh, this is a good idea, so we'll become a supported living provider, and that's now sort of trickling through in the marketplace, John. That they want to do background checks on who the providers are, who the supported living, are how long are they been operating for, what experience they have. If they're a new operator, John, well, we want to know what background you have in and around providing this support and type of care. Because insurers want to see repairing leases, if support providers are taking these properties on and their tenants are going to smash the place up, etc., they need to be able to sort of afford to reinstate the place, back to its fault, prior to the damage. So, and some of these new providers aren't able to do that. They don't have the funds or the liquid assets to do that. So, insurers are now started asking more and more questions. Who are these people, right? And who are you letting to, and what's their sort of credit worthiness?
So as a landlord, you need to make sure you've done that research and can answer those questions, I guess, don't you? That who you should do anyway, those checks before you sign a lease with a provider, shouldn't you? You should have an understanding of who they are and make sure you've done that due diligence on them anyway. But it's interesting that the insurance companies themselves are now asking those questions and expecting that level of knowledge about them.
We've already seen problems with new providers. We've already seen claims coming in, or attempted claims coming in, where there's no due diligence has been done. One of our clients got hit, right, where they lent it to a supported living provider, didn't get paid any rent for 8-9 months. They left the property in a state, left the tenants and everything in there, right? So that brought about its own problems as well, because then you can't just evict these people either, right? And especially in the current climate with COVID, etc., it brought a whole heap of problems that this, our client didn't need, and there was very little we could do about helping her try and get these, try and move these tenants on.
In light of that, Pinder, what would you say were the learning points from that experience? What would have prevented that situation from happening for other people listening?
Well, I mean, it's if you don't know what you're doing in this market space, deal with someone who knows this market space. There's letting agents out there that specialise with looking after supported living agencies, etc. Do your due diligence on the background of who this supported living agency is. How many other properties do they have, and do they have? Can we speak to maybe one or two other landlords? Have you had any problems? Bit like you would do with any prospective tenant coming in. He is your prospective tenant. If that prospective tenant can't afford to pay you, then why go down that route in the first place? Blindly signing leases, etc., with these type of people, you really are building a rod for your own back.
It absolutely, it does scare me a little bit. I think people have got very excited. Lots of landlords really love the idea of helping people out and are really kind of on board with it, and are sort of jumping into things and perhaps not doing those checks and checking things out in the way they should. I know it's something we do a supported living course, and we do a whole section of that course is all about that due diligence, because it is so important to do, and the questions to ask and understand exactly what their business model is. There's so much to go into there, isn't there, really, and make sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is the ultimate, the end tenant is not usually where the problems really start. We haven't really seen problems because of tenants. Most of the problems we've seen is because of unscrupulous providers, right? And especially, you can imagine the situation, John, you got a house full of, vulnerable adults with learning difficulties, etc. This person hasn't, what you would call it, paid you the rent. They end up doing one. how do you get rid of those sort of vulnerable adults and not look like some sort of, you know, ogre, you know, you know, trying to sort of put these poor people out on the street? You really do end up with a big problem, bigger problem than you would normally have to get rid of normal tenants.
And obviously you're based in Birmingham, and we know there's been a specific problem in Birmingham with a whole level of kind of low-level support providers. That's not to say it's unique to Birmingham. It happened, you know, obviously there's a mixture of providers all around the country, but it has been concentrated, hasn't it? I think this problem's been more concentrated in Birmingham.
It has been, John. Like, you know, we've had some problems in London as well, right? With, you know, a couple of smaller providers, etc. Those are the sort of two main places, you know, because that's where most of this supported living is. It's in the larger cities. Like, you know, we haven't had any problems in the other cities at the moment. It's just London and Birmingham seems to be sort of, you know, been a problem so far. That's not to say that, you know, it's not going to happen elsewhere. Like, you know, but tenants need to be sort of, you know, landlords, should I say, John, like, you know, just have to do that extra layer of due diligence, right? You know, to make sure that they are dealing with who they think they're dealing with.
You also mentioned tenants who have a history of arson, and that's a particular difficulty, isn't it, getting insurance if there's a tenant in a property who has a history of arson?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to know if they have or they haven't, right? You know, some of the insurers turn around and say, like, you know, well, we don't want ex junkies or ex addicts, etc. Well, unfortunately, like, you know, a lot of these people who are coming off the street could well have had a substance problem. That's why they're on the street in the first place, you know. So, you know, but if, you know, when you say you're going to be dealing with ex-offenders, right, unfortunately, you know, you might end up having to sort of house one of these type of people. But the whole point of dealing with supported living agencies that they will be doing constant monitoring, constant checking, have people there to safeguard that property. Like, you know, it's good, you know, at the end of the day, it's your property. It's a massive investment, you know. And if the old proverbial does hit the fan, you know, last thing you want is, you know, the mortgage providers recalling the loan, like, you know, and you not being able to do so, or the property's burnt down and the insurance hasn't covered it because this hasn't happened, that hasn't happened. You know, you financially you could end up ruining yourself.
Absolutely. You have to be, as you say, it's a very expensive asset, isn't it? You need to guard it and make sure you've got it sorted properly. I know I was talking to one care provider recently who had a referral and was trying to find a property for a young woman who has a history of arson. She has learning disabilities. She's kind of fascinated by fire and has this history of arson. And I don't know whether, you know, but she was saying to me, we know this is going to be really, really hard to find the right property, but also to find any insurance or any cover on it. And I actually need to follow up with her as to what happened, because I guess in that situation where you have a tenant that you know has that background, you need to declare that to your insurance company, don't you, and have that conversation with them.
You do, and you know, whilst not impossible, but it may well be financially not viable to do. So, you know, insurers might insist on X fire or X arson, right, or put a co-insurance claim or clause in saying, like, no, your minimum excess we have seen, John, like, no, will be £10,000, right, or 10%, whichever is the greater, right. So any small claims under 10,000 you'll have to deal with it yourself, but if the whole house burns down, so I know you could end up sort of being 10% or 20% co-insured, you know, having to pick up the, you know, the shortfall.
And I guess
if it's on a mortgage providers are not going to like it.
No, but I guess in those situations, if you're open up front with everybody, is then actually having that collaborative approach and saying, if the local authority really needs to place this person, you know, and they're working with the care provider and actually trying to come with a solution where the risk is shared across, you know, not just.
But then, you know, that's where you need to have that conversation. So whilst not impossible, right, you know, if the local authority is saying, look, well, we really need to put this person in somewhere, right, you know, maybe put the onus upon the additional terms that the insurers might want back on the local authority or the care provider, and say that, you know, you happy to give you the property, but, you know, these are the terms my insurers have put down. You picked up the shortfall, property's yours.
No,
but then again, back to your due diligence, can they afford to do it?
Very true. Pinder, have you got any advice or any tips for landlords? Anything that you think they should know about or think about when they're looking for insurance?
It all comes back to common sense half the time. You're like, just because you've let your property to a care provider, right, doesn't reduce your responsibility of duty and care towards your own property, right? You should be checking at least once every 3 months and saying, right, okay, has the care provider done what they said they were doing? Like, are their doors hanging off their hinges? Do you know what I mean? Which they should have repaired, because these sort of things can have a negative, that door that's hanging off its hinges falls over, hits a tenant, which we've had in London. This is, a cupboard where the back of the, for some reason or another, the cupboard has come loose, with the plates, etc. And the care provider hasn't fixed it, but they know about it. Yeah. And the cupboard has fallen off, right, whilst they've had a visit around, and it's split their head open. £40,000 claim.
On the landlord insurance or on the right, okay.
Property.
Yeah.
So therefore, that landlord is now having to pay a much increased premium because of this personal injury claim. Yeah. Because this cupboard should have been fixed. It wasn't.
No.
So, we do see these things. People don't, underestimate these things, but, the onus will fall back on you as the property owner, right, for the liability for that door, for that, not being the care provider that was in question didn't have the right insurance to have covered it. So we can't even go after them, right, to get reimbursement because they weren't covered.
But if they had the right insurance, then you should be able to So I guess that's part of your due diligence, is checking the insurance that the providers have as well.
Yeah, they've got the right professional indemnity cover and bits and pieces. That they're actually covered for what they're saying that they're doing, right? So, we actually look after probably about a couple of dozen, providers who've come to us and said, right, can you set up, the PI, the liability covers, etc. for us, and we've done exactly that for them. Right, so we've got low level, just vulnerable adults, learning difficulties, right? Or we've even got a couple who look after children, and we've got one that looks after, which was even more strange than one before. I've never come across it before. Was asylum seekers, but children. Yeah. So kids that have come over without parents, etc. Do you know what I mean? Right, then who are being housed in special facilities. And I didn't even know that existed.
There's actually a lot of it around. Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a lot of there. We it's because we asked the question. Because we would have just set up a normal asylum seekers, supported living asylum seekers, and until they mentioned, they're only 14, 15. Bugger. Those normal providers, they said, sorry, we don't want nothing to do with children. So we had to go to London Market, go to Lloyd's and say, right, this is the situation. It's not a problem. Premium doubled, but the rate they pay for children to be looked after, right, is substantially higher than they do for adults. So landlord was happy, got the right cover, because they could have had a real serious problem, because the insurance would have been void because it's children. Yeah. Under 18s, it seems to be a real problem, right? With insurers. So just due diligence, really. Just make sure you've got all the facts. You speak to someone who's asking all the questions, because a lot of these questions, the software systems don't ask, because we do that much of it, right? We're asking. My people have got an additional set of questions saying, right, okay, client comes through. Ask these additional sets of questions, so we making sure that everything's covered correctly. You'd be surprised the number of people that'll say, "Oh, I'm not paying that." You're getting sort of twice the market rent, with a much higher risk of damage, etc. And you expect to pay still £140 for your property insurance. No, that doesn't work like that, unfortunately. No. The exposure is much higher. For certain tenant groups, where like I said, we've got halfway house, for partners that have been in abusive relationships, etc. Right? Oh, why would that be a problem? Well, we've seen places smashed up, do you know what I mean, where the ex-partners found out where they live, do you know what I mean, like, and force their way in. So someone's got to pick up the damage.
Yeah.
So
brilliant. Thank you so much for that. It was really, really helpful. Thank you.
Well, I hope I haven't scared anyone, John, but it's.
I always joke because you always see the worst case situations with everything, don't you? So, I think that's always the case. In that you're great at warning us of the worst case when everyone else often thinks of the best case and is optimistic about things. I think with your experience, you can kind of advise people with that knowledge and that background. So it's useful.
Thankfully, it doesn't happen too often, but when it does happen, it can be expensive, right? So hopefully, touch wood. None of my clients have I'll end up having a profit share. Hopefully, at one point, don't have a big claim. I mean, this year we've had 4 cannabis farms report to us already.
Goodness.
Already, so that blows profit shares and everything all out of the water, John. So we've got to try and be careful about the type of
But they're not. Were they in supported living properties, Pinder, or were they in standard?
No. That sort of thing doesn't happen in supported living. No. We always get this in so-called professional lets.
Yeah.
So-called professional lets. We don't get cannabis farms or illegal activities in HMOs or supported living, really. Because you've got multiples of people living there, right? And it's so-called. Let to a professional individual, and the landlord hasn't been there in 6 months, and then surprise, it's the Amazon rainforest.
Thank you, Pinder. It's been really great chatting to you today. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Thank you.